ほら、ルフィ、今一緒に海賊になる仲間を探してるんだ。
Hello guys, welcome to my channel The Wandering Zoro, your go-to destination for anime-related content. And if you're new here, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss out on our latest videos. In today's video, we're going to be diving into part 4 of the series What If Quirkless Izuku Had the Abilities of the Overwatch Agents. So be sure to stick around until the end, and let's get started. Bob, Izuku harshly whispered to the Omnic. The metal giant tilted their head and looked up towards Izuku, blinking at him with their mechanical eyelids. Izuku still didn't know why he had that feature, but knew he couldn't let himself get off track, especially at a time like this. Someone else is on board the ship, and they clearly aren't Hanzo nor a part of the Yakuza group. Cassidy and Ash are going to be in trouble, Izuku explained. Bob seemed to mull over his words before shaking their head, predicting what intentions Izuku had already. Izuku, tense before in a panicked rush, looked back over the shipping crates. He could see some Omnics patrolling around the deck with one skinny man with an elongated spinny neck that looked to be made of steel bones. If he used his EMP, the Omnics around would immediately shut down, and he had jolt tokens to subdue the lone man to prevent him calling back up, especially if their neck was metal. However, if he decided to use the EMP, Bob would go down with them, and Izuku had no intention of disabling Bob, especially when he was the one thing protecting him right now. But because he was protecting him, Cassidy and Ash were not. Is there a way I can sway you? I know the two are very capable, but this person can teleport. I watch them. If they are a hero, they can easily negate the weapons Ash and Cassidy possess, and if they are a hero, they most certainly can fight in hand-to-hand. If we stay here, they're in trouble, Izuku told the Omnic. Bob stared at him. Izuku couldn't read him as his face stayed static, but the giant robot put him down. Izuku looked up and saw them crouch, their head beginning to nod. Oh, okay, Izuku quipped out, a mixture of surprise and nerves erupting through him as Bob gave him the go-ahead. He scurried into his bag and pulled a few inconspicuous items out. Here's the plan. Izuku shuddered but steeled himself. He wasn't going to be weak. He had been depicted as such for far too long and was more than just past tired of it. Izuku dropped down off the crates after wasting a minute of waiting for an opportunity. He hid behind metal pipes with jolt tokens clutched in his hands. He was waiting for his opening with the one man surveying the ship deck. He knew his jolt tokens wouldn't work on the Omnics. The way they produced their harmful shock couldn't get into their circuitry system unless they had exposed wires. They were immune to his simple gadget. However, Bob could take out the others if he timed it right, so Izuku would be waiting on the Omnics signal. He was slightly skeptical on the Omnics' intelligence. They did seem highly loyal to Ash to the point of dependence, but it could easily just be protection programming. If they were stupid, he would think that Ash would have gotten rid of them. Although how long has Ash been acquainted with Bob? Izuku, pay attention. Our and Ash and Cassidy's life is on the line here. Izuku screamed in his head before focusing his attention on the long-necked thug. He tried not to analyze the man's quirk, although it was clearly fascinating as the way his head moved and each bony segment moved against each other was truly wondrous to look at. No bad, Izuku. Just throw the damn jolt tokens at him when Bob takes out the far Omnic. Izuku yelled in his own mind. No more than a second later, two Omnics with metal hair crashed into an Omnic that seemed to be checking the boxes with a clipboard, smashing against a shipping crate and causing a dent. The man obviously whirled his head like an owl at the loud noise, and Izuku scrambled onto his feet. He had his arm far behind him and used the little might he had to hurl his jolt tokens at the man. The thug started gargling in pain as 4 small black coins collided with him. Blue sparks zapped his body and quickly bounced off, but the one that hit his neck clung for a few seconds longer, blue trails of electricity running up and down from head to shoulders. Then the token launched off the boat, traveling a far greater distance than all the others. Welp, that leaves 8. Izuku sighed as he watched that happen. He ran towards the staggering man that was frothing from the mouth with his eyes rolled to the back of his head. Izuku absent-mindedly thought that he probably hadn't killed him. The tokens could barely incapacitate people. But then again, that was with 1 and he was hit with 4, one of them hitting a clear weak spot. Izuku scooped the remaining tokens and ran towards Bob, who had moved towards the slump omnics. Moving them gently to rest against the shipping together they just smashed against. He did hope that they hadn't been damaged severely because in Japan, he doubts anyone would be willing to fix them. Izuku plops his tokens back into his little black sack that he hid in his pocket. He was wearing his CRB glasses already. He was little worried about his moon boots because they would automatically activate if they touched his CRB shield. He just hoped that wouldn't cause trouble for him. "Bob, we should go down quickly," Izuku asked in a hushed tone. Bob merely nodded before jogging towards the stairs, picking his legs up high with his elbows on his hips and arms limply hanging in front on a right angle. He was trying to sneak, but his bulky mechanical body was definitely not built for it. Izuku only winced but started jogging after him. They roamed the hallways, looking around for any sign of Cassidy, Ash, or any other standing threat. Currently, all they had found were people in oversized leather jackets or blue tuxedos knocked out of the floor. Izuku also picked up a RBB bullet, indicating Katsuki, but he was slightly concerned about the broken sticks of arrows with liquids and a foul smell consuming the area. There were also holes in the wall, but judging by the lack of heat around it, or any kind of smoky smell, Izuku guessed those small holes weren't caused by bullets. Bob and Izuku were tiptoeing their way around the barge. Not subtly, Izuku cringed. The amount of dread that was piling over him was making Izuku start to feel nauseous. Izuku had inhaled deeply, trying to settle his bouncing nerves, but he soon found that to be a mistake as the floor suddenly became a slope. "Whoa," Izuku managed to spit out as he lost his focus from his attention being used to calm himself down. Bob started shuffling forward and gabbed Izuku with his large arm, practically covering his entire chest. Bob outstretched his arm, slapping it against the wall, catching himself and stopping Izuku from crashing headfirst into solid wood. Izuku was now slightly dazed, now from the boat, or maybe it was a mixture. Either way, he felt like he was going to puke. Izuku had squeezed his eyes shut when Bob grabbed him because the feeling had been overwhelming to him. However, now as he felt his body stop, he opened his eyes and looked ahead. The same fox girl with a white Miko dress at the end of the hallway. Her foot on the wall as the sharp was still angled from the rocking, but it was slowly coming back down. She had twirled on a dime, and Izuku immediately panicked. He pressed the button on the side of his glasses, and a translucent blue barrier sparked into reality a foot away from him. 3 thin blades tapped the barrier but bounced off, spinning in the air. Izuku yelled in fright on pure reaction and instinct, and his cry clearly caught the woman off guard as she raised her body attentively. Bob spun around and opened the door behind him and smashed it closed. Bob looked around, observing his cabin's surroundings with strung-up paper of schedules, maps, and other things on the wall. Izuku, however, was beginning to hyperventilate. "SHD," Cassidy swore, ducking his head back behind the doorway as an arrow whizzed past, embedding itself into the floor. Cassidy sighed and looked over to Ash with a smirk, who rolled her eyes at him. She started making hand motions, and Cassidy nodded in response. She kept her gun pointing outward, but was withdrawn from pulling the trigger. Cassidy had his revolver beside his head, and he breathed lightly. "Hanzo, I'm not here to fight you," Cassidy yelled out in Japanese, although his thick American accent was clearly coming through. There was silence, which concerned Ash, but Cassidy had a hopeful smile on his face as he pictured what would be going through Genji's brother's mind. "What?" a deep voice shouted back, making Cassidy huff confidently. My partner here aren't with this Yakuza gang you're fighting. Actually, I'm an old friend of Genji, and he wanted me to come talk to you because he is kind of held up at the moment," Cassidy explained. Ash awkwardly huffed. She had no idea what Cassidy was saying, but she wouldn't put it past him to make fun of her. Again, there was another PRGNNT pause, and Cassidy waited for Hanzo's response. "Why should I trust you?" Hanzo responded sharply. How would you like me to prove me honesty?" Cassidy inquired. "That is your job to figure out," Hanzo said, and Cassidy couldn't help but picture a wise man saying that. He shrugged and tossed his gun out into the room, disarming himself, then straightening his posture. He looked towards Ash, who looked at him like he was a madman, but Cassidy only gestured for her to holster her rifle. Ash looked defiant, clearly not like this idea, but somehow she listened and put her weapon away. "I'm disarmed. My partner's weapon is holstered, and we have no quirks capable of harming you. Are you willing to listen?" Cassidy asks, looking around the large dark room for the bowman. This is a time where he really wished his quirk activated at night. Ash timidly walked into the room behind Cassidy. Her features scrunched at the dark room, and she looked towards the door in hopes of finding a light SWCH. She saw something that was close, and she smashed her fist against it. The lights around the room came on, blinding Ash and Cassidy. They blinked drearily but managed to focus on what was around, and their eyes were shocked. There were several glass boxes with large dead animals located inside. Some of them were unclear of what animal they were. They had been taken apart so much that the animal was no longer recognizable. Cassidy was the first to spot Hanzo on the ceiling, pinning himself between two metal bars to hold himself up as he pointed an arrow with his bow at him. Cassidy raised his arms up in surrender. "May I swear, we've got nothing to do with this," Cassidy replied. Hanzo didn't answer, instead dropping down and landing gracefully on the floor near Cassidy, his bow still pointing at him. "I do recognize you, cowboy," Hanzo states with clear disdain, and Cassidy finally gets a good look at him. He didn't know what he expected as he has never really seen Ginji's face either. What he has left is still littered with scars. He kind of assumed he would very dark green hair like Ginji, but he has the generic pure black. He was wearing mostly black, but he had a long blue piece of fabric wrapped around his waist. His breathes seemed to be baggy but didn't look malleable from where Cassidy stood, and his sleeveless top seemed to be made of the same material, and it was very tight on his body. He held his metallic blue bow with his left hand that was covered in an intricate dragon tattoo that ranged from brown, gold, and blue in color. His facial hair was minimal but clear, a neat beard and mustache with clear separation, and his long hair was tightened into a bun. "What looks like my charm extends across international waters then," Cassidy smirked, only causing for Hanzo to draw his bow back further. "It isn't for a good reason," Hanzo replied. Cassidy sighed and dropped his hands. Ash was kept her arms firmly in front of her. She was itching to reach back and grab her gun, especially since it felt like the conversation was going south, but she had to trust Cassidy. If she even motioned for her gun, an arrow would be lodged straight into his jugular. It would be really helpful if she understood what was going on. "You don't have the best reputation either. Last time I checked, you're the reason Ginji has all of his cybernetics. You do know about that, correct?" Cassidy accused, his eyes narrowing. Hanzo challenged the cowboy, his eyes narrowing in return. Cassidy stood his ground. Currently his trust was in Ginji as he didn't have much of a read on Hanzo's character other than he was hyper-serious. He was truly risking his own life here. If Hanzo chose to, him, Ash, and perhaps even Izuku would all be killed. But Ginji wouldn't have asked him to do this if he didn't believe Cassidy could convince his brother. So Cassidy took a step closer, the tip of the arrow close to grazing his Adam's apple. "Listen, Ginji wants you to move on as you're clearly the one person holding yourself back. You're not the heir of the Yakuza anymore. You are a wanted vigilante and from my perspective, is only concerned about themselves. You can do so much more. This operation you're doing now is indicative of that, but you are being unreasonably stubborn. Ginji wants your help. Will you give him a hand this time?" Cassidy tells Hanzo, his usually aloof nature gone. Cassidy wasn't many things. He wasn't smart, but he was street smart. He knew how to use his charisma to his advantage, and if he was going to get anyway with Hanzo, he'd need to use low blows. Hanzo's expression didn't change, but he did shuffle his posture, his fingers loosening so he could grip them tighter in a different spot on his bow. He cracked his neck and pushed the bow closer to Cassidy's throat, the tip poking his skin. If any force would be applied, then Cassidy would draw BLD. "What is your name, cowboy?" Hanzo asked, with a stoic expression, not revealing anything to Hanzo. "I went by Jesse McCree back in Overwatch, but now I go by Cole Cassidy," Cassidy answered, his usual upbeat character cracking through his sudden cold one. Hanzo's hand on his arrow twitched before he pulled the weapon away. Relieving Cassidy of the arrow's tips, he pulled the bow into his quiver and stood up tall, looking up slightly to look Cassidy in his eyes. Ash felt relieved at the bowman's actions and moved her arms to. "I will concede on that, Cassidy, but I still no reason to follow your words," Hanzo spoke concisely. Cassidy rose his brow and looked at him incredulously. "Seriously? You're not following my words. You'll be following your brother's," Cassidy said sharply. Hanzo's mouth thinned into an almost invisible line, and he looked away. Cassidy could see he had gotten him with that, and was intending to prod further. However, a shriek caught his attention. "Izuku?" Cassidy shouted. Cassidy's worry spiked, and he looked around. The young teen's voice echoed around the barge's hallways, and Cassidy could definitely tell that it wasn't coming from above him, which meant Izuku and Bob went under the deck, which meant that they had a need to come under and now were in trouble. "Was that Midoriya?" Ash announced, spinning around and pulling out her weapon, but she flinched as Cassidy fired 2 shots up towards the roof. She turned to look at him, and he stood tall with his eyes dripping with worry. She could tell he was keenly listening in for another one of Izuku's screams or Bob's thunderous steps. Luckily, one of the two was heard quickly after. Bob's thundering footsteps became louder and louder, and a large bang sounded. A rubble and wood shot out from a wall, causing the trio in the room to jump back. Bob was hunched in, a shaking and nauseous-looking Izuku clutched in his large metal arms. "That hurt," Izuku choked out before he succumbed to a coughing fit. Cassidy had his gun raised, prepared to shoot the next person he sees. Ash quickly dashed towards Izuku and Bob, her gun pulled out ready to fire, but her main concern was on Izuku. She put a hand on his shoulder, but Izuku only started shaking more. His breathing became hoarse, and his movements became far closer to thrashing. Midoriya, listen to me. You are okay," Ash tried to tell him, but Izuku didn't seem to be listening. Ash was panicking on what to do. Comforting isn't exactly a strong suit for her, let alone on what to do with a child in immense distress. Cassidy made his way towards Izuku himself, his eyes still flickering from the 2 doors of the room in the newly made hole. "You brought a child?" Hanzo asked from behind the 2 Americans. Ash spun around, flabbergasted at Hanzo speaking English all of a sudden. Cassidy didn't respond and walked around Ash. "What the hell? You could speak English this entire time?" Ash cried out, and Hanzo looked away. A slight smirk creased his lips, but he drew his bow back and got ready to fire. "Bob, put Midoriya down," Cassidy asked the robot butler, gently as if he were glass. Izuku was placed on the ground, but his body violently shook. His hair hung down in front of his eyes and beads of sweat were starting to drizzle down the side of his head. Izuku was trying to breathe, but his air was getting choked in his own throat. Cassidy slowly kneeled in front of Izuku and removed his hat. He put his fleshy hand over Izuku's heart and took one of Izuku's hands and placed over his own heart. "Count with me. 1, 2, 3, 4. Your hair is green. 1, 2, 3, 4. What color is your hair?" Cassidy asked in a soothing tone. Izuku continued to shudder, his feet slowly moving from one spot on the floor to another. His throat was wobbly and Izuku could feel how dry his mouth was, yet he managed to sputter out a response. "G green. Good. 1, 2, 3, 4. Give me the name of an Omnic," Cassidy gently instructed Izuku. 3, 4, 5. Izuku struggled to get out, but his expression was lightening, and he was beginning to take deeper breaths than he was able to before. Bob?" Izuku answered unsurely. Cassidy smiled, placing his hat over Izuku's head, causing the team to look up at the cowboy. "Hey, are all right in there? Can you tell me what's happening?" Cassidy asked softly. Izuku stared with wide eyes for a small moment before rapidly blinking and nodding his head. Yum. I saw this lady with a fox mask, dark teal hair, and a white Miko dress teleport onto the ship and take out some Yakuza members. She rushed down the stairs, and I felt like why you guys were in trouble since she can teleport." Izuku nervously spoke, but he raised his tone at the end in his effort to defend himself. Cassidy chuckled and patted Izuku's head. Okay, you're smart, Izuku. I know you did the right thing. So let's focus on getting out of here now. Isn't that right, Hanzo?" Cassidy responded, looking back at Hanzo with a serious glare. Hanzo rolled his eyes but kept his bow drawn, aiming at one of the hallways. "Sure, but how do you expect all of us to get off this boat unnoticed? He specifically doesn't seem like the quiet type," Hanzo inquired, nodding his head towards Bob, who seemed to get upset at his words. By a boat at the back of the ship, same we as four got on. Ash butted in as she stood next to Bob. She felt like she should have been the one to go towards Izuku and try and help him, but she just didn't know how. She's glad Cassidy did, though. Something his time at Overwatch probably taught him. Izuku shakily attempted to stand on his 2 feet again, but the action was a struggle for the young boy. Bob picked Izuku up and placed him on his shoulders, the greenette shivering but squeezing his legs onto Bob and gasping his head tightly in his hands. Hanzo meanwhile scanned them with his narrowed eyes. He was suspicious of them, but the cowboy's story had made sense. Usually when people recognized him, it wasn't for good reasons. Ex-Shimada clan members after him for revenge or to become whatever experiment that Shy Hisakai group wanted. He didn't trust these two, and he still had unfinished business he needed to handle, and even the words of his brother wouldn't sway him. But sudden glimpse of memory hit him as he drawled on the facts of the Cole Cassidy, his cowgirl partner, their robotic butler, and green-haired kid. The green-haired teen that shouldn't have been here described the person he saw as a woman wearing a fox mask with dark teal hair and a white Miko dress. That description reminds him of his old mentor, Asa Yamagami, the woman who taught him the way of the sword. She was dedicated to her craft and was incredibly strict with it, especially on him since she could see potential in him, mainly because he took the task incredibly seriously. Unlike his brother and his sensei's own daughter, who'd often sneak away and began to partake in more carefree acts. She had retired from her previous position as defender before she began teaching him her arts. But the description could not possibly be a coincidence. Ace's family was known as Kaori before she married, and they were worshippers of the Fox Shrine for centuries. Ace's quirk matched the sputtering of the bushy-haired teenager. Perhaps it was her daughter Kiriko, or another representative who tribute the trickster's shrine. He knew the people relating to the shrine had quirks that connected to their very spirit, so they could be taught to others with the same connection. Either way, them being here didn't spell good news to Hanzo. He hoped they wouldn't be strongly against him. "Okay, Hanzo, what are you looking for?" "We'll help you then, Hightail, before any more trouble comes around," Cassidy asks. Hanzo creeps towards them, his bow still drawn at the ready for anyone else who would sprint into the room. "I'm already finished here. Let's just get on the move," Hanzo answered in an annoyed tone. Ash rolled her eyes and Cassidy sighed. He was kind of asking on what Hanzo was here for in the first place, but he guessed that the mysterious and untrusting Bowman was not going to spill his pointless secret. "Sure, let's go. I'll lead," Cassidy said, walking towards the hole in the wall Bob had created with his revolver held firmly in front of him. His quirk may currently be inactive since it was night, but he still was quite observant without it. He wasn't going to allow for the Fox Lady nor Hashimoto member to ambush them. Bob staunched behind him, his arm that didn't have Izuku on the shoulders stretched out and panels extended out to reveal gun barrels. Ash motioned for Hanzo to follow, not comfortable to have the man be at the back of the group. Hanzo rolled his eyes at her precaution, but at least acknowledged her sensibility. He would have dipped the first chance he got. The group made their way through the barge's hallways, going as quick as they could while still remaining quiet. Bob's footsteps certainly were alerting, which impeded their progress, but they had been firing their guns moments before, so the loud, clattering feet of the butler Omnic couldn't have been the loudest thing happening. Their trek remained uninteresting, but they remained cautious throughout their trip to the stairs. Cassidy nimbly ran up ahead and swiped around for anyone else on the barge, but he saw no one. He motioned the others to follow, but a voice had Ash, Hanzo, and Bob all spin around to look below the deck with their weapons pointing at them. "Whoa, don't shoot. I mean no harm," the person yelled back in Japanese, her hands stretched out to try and freeze Ash, Hanzo, and Bob from shooting her. Ash and Bob did not lower their weapons, but Hanzo slowly moved his downward. "What did she say?" Ash whisper yelled behind her, clearly not understanding what the Fox Lady had just said. Hanzo analyzed her. She certainly was young, couldn't be much older than 20 at best. Her mask definitely represented the mask the Kaori family wore, and although it had been years since he has even thought of her, Kiriko should be around 20, so he decided to ask. "Are you Kiriko?" Hanzo calls out, his feet slowly traveling back down the stairs, passing by the white-haired cowgirl. He looked quizzically at her, and the woman tilted her head. His eyes glanced over their body, looking for weapons. He couldn't find a katana or a sword of any kind strapped to her body, but he can see kunais hanging down a red rope around her waist and spot ticket-like paper with symbols that definitely resembled what was at the Fox Shrines. The woman reached up to her mask, one grabbing the noise and the other removing the straps around her head. The mysterious Fox Lady dropped the mask and revealed the youthful face of a young woman with her dark teal hair flopping over her forehead and covering areas of her eyes. She had red marks under her dark eyes that closely emanated gold, and her pink lips popped against her skin. "Hey, Uncle Hanzo. Been a while since you've seen me, hey?" Kiriko laughed, waving her hand up at the group as she tried to casually walk forward. But her eyes were darting towards Ash and Bob, as both still had their weapons drawn and were pointing at her. She didn't look scared, but she was certainly on edge. "What are you doing here?" Hanzo said, his guard still raised. He hated the fact he was acting so cagey around a person he considered to be like a niece to him. But their relationship had definitely faded since the day the Shimada clan fell. He had no doubt she had a few words of resentment towards him. He couldn't blame her for that, but he was worried if she had any other ulterior motive. "You're not the only one having problems with the Hashimoto group. Those guys are tearing up my neighborhood, and they're only expanding. If someone isn't going to do something, a large part of Japan is going to become unlivable," Kiriko defended, crossing her arms over her chest. "Take this to the boat. I don't want to wait for someone to come up here to check if their guys are still doing their job," Cassidy grunted, coming down the stairs to growl at the small reunion. Kiriko blinked before turning to Hanzo with a confused look. Hanzo sighed and jerked his head towards the others, walking back towards the stairs. Kiriko was still confused, her head turning to look at Ash, who slowly put her gun down. "God, I need to install some kind of translator on you, Bob," Ash complained, as she walked backwards up the stairs, not taking her eyes off of Kiriko. However, she still had no idea who this person was. Kiriko smiled at her, confusing Ash before she grouchily spoke. "Oh, you speak English as well, don't you?" The now group of 6 silently reached the back of the barge. Cassidy peered down and spotted that their boat was indeed still floating next to the ship. However, the front seemed a little damaged, likely from the waves causing the smaller boat to ram into the larger one. The damage was visible, but Cassidy doubted it would stop the boat from running. "Wait, how the hell are we supposed to get back down?" Ash piped up, looking down concerned at the far drop. "We go down quickly," Cassidy responded, as he pulled a rope out from his belt. Cassidy adds a hook to his rope and lodges into the boat before jumping down. He drags the rope with him, holding it tightly in his arms to slow his rapid descent. Izuku and Ash stare down with wide eyes as they watch Cassidy seemingly performs this act. "Let's get this over with," Hanzo complains as he jumps over the side of the barge and climbs down, only barely using the rope he had, mostly using his hands against the lumps on the side to slow himself down. Kiriko hops down just after him, which also confuses Ash and Izuku. "She's coming down with us?" Izuku questions as he watches her disappear. "I guess so," Ash mutters before climbing onto Bob's shoulders. "Bob, get us down," Ash growled, holding tight onto his metal body. Bob slowly climbed over, and instead of holding onto the rope, he just fell. Ash and Izuku's body tightened, and fear swelled through them as they seemingly free fell. They approached the boat very fast, but Bob slammed their arms into the boat, denting it with their bare hands. Izuku and Ash gushed and groaned as they almost instantly came to a stop. Izuku went to throw up, but managed to keep it down. Bob managed to dislodge himself from the barge and landed on smaller fancy white boat they had originally came on. "Glad you guys could drop. Now let's get the F out of here," Cassidy laughed before walking through the door to get the boat's steering wheel. "So what's going on with you guys?" Kiriko asks, sitting up straight and looking towards Bob, Ash, and Izuku. Both were huddled next to Bob, as there wasn't much room on the boat. They were sitting at the back, Bob holding onto the ledge to stop himself and his 2 companions from flying off. Hanzo and Kiriko sat in 2 chairs away from everyone else, perpendicular to the door. "You first. I still have no idea who you are," Ash sneered, crossing her arms over her chest and glaring at the girl. Izuku looked over to Ash and gave a sympathetic look back towards Kiriko, shrugging his arms. Kiriko bit her tongue at Ash's response and resisted the overwhelming urge to sigh or laugh at her. Her eyes still flickered to the holstered rifle on her side, clearly still wary of what she should say around the snow-haired woman. "Well, if you want an introduction, I'm Kiriko," Kiriko smiled, putting 2 fingers at the top of her head and moving them forward, representing a greeting. "Me and the Hashimoto group aren't great friends, so you'll usually find me messing around with them. Although I am curious to why you're here, Hanzo," Kiriko said cheerily, but turned her attention to Hanzo, who turned his eyes to look at her. "Yeah, I'm curious too," Cassidy announced as he walked through the door. The sky was still dark, but far lighter than what it had previously been when they last looked. City building lights glowed from the distance, but they were so far away from the shore. It is nothing major. Information that I needed clarified, Hanzo replied ambiguously, causing everyone else on the boat to frown and glare at him. Mate, the Hashimoto and Shai Hisakai are working together, and apparently the only time you ever confront the Hashimoto was to mourn your brother's death, Cassidy stated, resting his metal arms against the door. Hanzo just turned and glared at him. Is that something you got from my brother? Hanzo inquired, clearly upset. Cassidy smirked and nodded. Wait, Genji. Kiriko spoke up, clearly surprised and concerned. Oh God, please, I don't want to talk about all of that here, Hanzo drawled, putting his face in his hand. Cassidy shook his head. Look, if you tell us more about you, we'll tell you more about us, Cassidy stated, and everyone else around him nodded. He was perplexed as to why Kiriko was joining in with them, but she also probably wanted the explanation just as much as everyone else. Mostly about Genji probably. The two were quite close before his supposed death. Izumi sat with Shoto and Momo at her house's dining table. They were talking about things happening in school and recent hero events, but the weight of Izuku's incident was really leaving them confused. Momo was barely touching her tea. Her feelings had only been incredibly down over the past 3 days. Momo, are you still thinking about the things with Izuku? Shoto inquired, peering over to his raven-haired friend. She sighed and moved her long hair back behind her ears and looked down to her light brown drink that was held in a small porcelain cup. Are you not? Things haven't been close to being resolved, and he's still in danger from our actions, Momo replied, astonished by Shoto. Shoto frowned, leaning back in his chair and quizzically looking at his friend. We didn't push him to align himself with Overwatch, Shoto responded incredulously. Momo threw her arms up into the air. Why wouldn't he? They supported the Quirkless. We haven't. People who proclaim to be future heroes. Why would he not change his ideals? Momo rebutted. Shoto went to argue, but Momo continued to silence him. We had no reason to destroy his inventions, to put egregious wounds all over his body and ostracize him from everyone. We did all of those things. Tell me, what of those things I listed remind you of a hero because no bell is ringing for me? Momo spits out aggressively. Shoto stares at her, flabbergasted by her outburst before huffing and looking away, grabbing his chopsticks and contemplate about taking another bite. Izumi stayed quiet, looking between her two friends with a bouncing leg and a soda can clutched close to her chest. You have no talent, drive, or even a semblance of integrity. You're just a scum who abuses their brother because no one is going to try and stop you. Katsuki's words rang in Izumi's mind. Izumi had always believed that she was the greatest. She had been hero material from the moment she spawned in this world. But how true is that? She had hurt and disposed of Izuku most of her life because he was beneath her. He was a filthy Quirkless. Almost all others around her had stood by her actions, encouraging it, or even joining in with. She had never thought she had done nothing wrong, yet she hid from her parents. Why? Perhaps she subconsciously knew it was wrong to do, or just didn't have enough time to torment him while she got treated like a princess. Izumi had always believed she had her path solidly laid in front of her like cement, but now, she could see the cracks and potholes. Izumi now sat confused as she tried to figure out where she stood, but thinking had never been something that came to her. She always had been headstrong, doing whatever first came to her mind. But now she couldn't be further confused. Shoto sat, a storming mixture of anger and confusion. Why had Izumi and Momo suddenly changed their tune? They had always known Izuku loved Overwatch. Why was this so shocking, and why did they suddenly care? He was Quirkless. He was weak. He was nothing. His dad said he was doing the bushy-haired teen a favor, if anything. But Izumi had seemed to have lost her confidence, and Momo had become all distraught. He believed this was all just some overreaction. The heroes will retrieve Izuku, and they'll immediately go back to laughing at him and pushing him down. Momo felt distressed. Izuku was now in reins with a psychopath cowboy who worked with Overwatch, and apparently, Calamity Ash was here in Japan as well. Why was all of this happening to him? Why had she and her friends pushed him so far away? Genuinely, she wanted to help. Being a hero was just unattainable for a Quirkless individual. No matter how intelligent, resourceful, or tricky a person may be, they can't keep up with a person who has wings on their feet that allow them to just fly away. Not all Quirks can either, even useful ones in heroics, but that is why it's a tough job to get into. Not everyone can become heroes. Only the best of the best, and a quirk largely determines that. She liked Izuku. He was cute, determined, and inventive, but fragile. He would certainly die, so dissuading him was the only option, but Yagis are known to be thick-skulled. So, her version of persuasion was a bit more brutal than most, but it had to be done. She may have gone above and beyond in some areas, but it was only to stop him from getting a girlfriend. She may have been a little jealous, but you can't blame her. Well, you definitely can. You three have fun. I'm going out, Toshinori called as he quickly walked towards the door, barely paying mind to the three kids sitting at the table. Izumi seemingly woke up from her internal dilemma and swiveled around to see her retreating father. "Oh, Dad, where are you?" The door slammed shut with a harsh bang. "Going," Izumi finished dejectedly. Toshinori locked the door behind before jogging to the small front gate. A long navy blue convertible sat on the side of the road, the engine still running and a man clearly inside. Wordlessly, Toshinori opened the car door once he reached it and slithered into the car's seat. "All right, Toshi, let's get going quick," Naomasa Tsukachi stated. He was a relatively plain-looking man with short black hair, dark brown eyes, and average build. He wore a normal suit, but had an oversized beige trench coat over the top. "What's the new stitch on my son?" Toshinori asked immediately, not waiting to mess around. "Nothing much since the service station incident. As of currently, they could be on a boat out of the country or stuck under the subway tracks. There is really no way for us to know without any new leads," Tsukachi answered while he drove the car. "Hey, I thought you said your son admired heroes greatly," Tsukachi piped when they stopped at a red light. "As far as I've known, he always have. He used to get many All Might memorabilia and many others I can't name off the top of my head," Toshinori responded. He had a slight stutter in his words because at that point he realized he actually had no idea what his son had liked. It actually scared him how little of Izuku he actually knew about, and he was worried that his lack of attention with him may have a reason with that. Izuku just had the tendency to lie, get into fights, and skip out on studying, so he would punish him by giving him nothing. But that must have been the wrong way to DSBL in him. The last time he ever got him something, an All Might poster, as it was his favorite hero, but after his encounter with his son in his hero persona, clearly his opinion had dropped, and significantly. "But why?" Naomasa hummed at Toshinori's answer, but didn't say more. The man worked with the police for over a decade, and was a longtime friend to Toshinori, and was aware of his #1 hero identity. He was a high-profile detective that usually dealt with issues that pre-trained with All Might on the precaution to keep his identity a secret. He had great trust for the man, and the same was true back. Naomasa specifically liked Toshinori because he never activated his lie detector quirk, until just then, as a dull shock ran from his fingers all the way through Naomasa's body from the latter half of Toshinori's answer, and Naomasa currently didn't know how to feel about that. Katsuki sat on his bed, his hand holding a scruffy and tattered book with another book like that on a small table next to his bed. His face was turned down in a frown, but as Katsuki had aged, his resting facial muscles have just developed to give him a permanent grumpy look. He was at school again today. Izumi was far more reserved than Katsuki had ever seen the girl. He usually didn't care about Izumi, but her non-existent presence did catch his attention as he could always feel her potent ego oozing off of her. However, he still couldn't give a SHD. He was more focused on the fact that Izuku wasn't here. In fact, a new special was released while he was at school, taking every class by storm as they learned that Izuku had been snatched by weaselly weapon smugglers. But that detail was glossed over as everyone fixated on the fact he was taken by Calamity Ash, the most wanted villain in America, and Jesse McCree, an ex-Overwatch agent. Everyone immediately spouted nonsense at the media claiming he was taken by the Western duo since the nerd was an Overwatch fanatic and Katsuki was inclined to believe, partially. No way in hell would Izuku hitch a ride in a weapon smuggler truck. Even if he knew where Jesse McCree was, the nerd was an idiot, not moronic. Besides, why the F was Calamity Ash here in Japan? How the hell was she here in Japan? Something fishy was going on, and Katsuki suspected Overwatch was involved since McCree was in town. Now that Izuku had effectively fled, no matter what his intentions were when he somehow made it all the to Kyoto, Katsuki had decided to look at Izuku's journals or workbooks that he retrieved from the pond. Katsuki hated Izuku. The fact that a useless Deku like him was intelligent enough to be better than him already irks Katsuki beyond belief. But the information he could see while he read through the mess of the watered-down book was simultaneously infuriated Katsuki, yet instilled fear into him. Izuku's analyzability was scarily accurate, from their quirks to habits, and even intentions. He read Izumi's page entry and had smirked at the accuracy of her SHD personality and limited knowledge she has over her own quirk. But that smile fell as soon as Katsuki read his own. Temperamental, villain-like, head of hearing, smokescreen/flashbang, and starts every fight with a right hook. Katsuki read Izuku list down his habits, details about his own quirk he hadn't even realized, and what he likes to do when initiating fights, and how he handles himself throughout it. Katsuki became uncomfortable reading such in-depth analyze of everything about him, including how to take him down. Using his quirk's problem with water and how to take advantage of the recoil, blindness, and deafness drawbacks his quirks have, and Katsuki gulped as he read Izuku's ideas of how to take him down. He continued to read, looking at other teenagers Katsuki didn't know too, and then looking heroes. Top 10 heroes to redundant C-listers Izuku had explained in the book. Many of them Katsuki had never heard of. Eventually, he started skimming through the book until he reached blank pages. He checked the back page because if there was to be anything extra, it would be there. He was surprised at what he found. All for one, Katsuki stated slowly, his eyes squinting, and he pulled the book closer to his face. Katsuki stared at it. A man that could steal quirks and give them to others. Yeah, that was something that a quirkless loser like Deku would be into. But the more Katsuki read it, it seemed like it was less about a desperate quirkless ramble. He read about the several health ramifications of quirkless people gaining a quirk as their bodies don't have the natural quirk enzymes that produce quirks. Additionally, it had records of people getting their quirk laid, or people possessing quirks unfit for their body. Katsuki also saw that apparently, this all-for-one man has existed for over 200 years, almost as long as quirks have existed themselves, but apparently All Might himself had stated he killed the man almost a decade ago. How the hell would Deku know if All Might had said that at all? Katsuki huffed before tossing the book at the bottom of his bed. He had to stop overthinking things. Deku is just a pathetic, desperate, quirkless loser. He didn't care what was going on through that useless SHT's mind. It didn't matter to Katsuki how badly Izuku wanted a quirk. Reality would teach him that lesson. The spiky-haired boy sighed and swung his feet up and off his bed. He then stood and stretched his back, raising his arms high into the air. With a satisfied crack, Katsuki sighed. His eyes wandered down to the second tattered book that laid open on his small bedside table. The page was open with several gadgets with Katsuki's name at the top. This was something Katsuki felt bad about. He knew Izuku was brilliant, and these inventions showed it. He didn't care if the nerd got into support gear. It made no difference to him, so Katsuki did feel slightly bad. He only gave a SHD because the quirkless BSDRD believed he could stand with him as a hero. Because Katsuki believed he could. But he can't take SHD back, and he now has the nerd's notebook. May as well use the clever designs Izuku had made in the book when he inevitably gets accepted into UA. It will just extend his lead over his classmates. Kiriko tried to subtly pull a large brown sack closer to her, moving the opening to her so she can see inside. But with 4 others directly around her, one person in particular eyes gleaming with daggers in her direction. It was anything but subtle. "Oi, stop looking through our SHD," Ash sneered, leaning over to the bag to try and drag it away, but it was loaded with a bunch of trash she and Izuku stole from the ships in the boating docks. "What?" Kiriko responds, raising her hands next to her face in a mock surrender. "There was nothing but junk in there," Kiriko says. Ash scoffs and rolls her eyes. Izuku twiddles his fingers awkwardly, debating whether or not he should input, but his social anxiety kept him silent. Hanzo, meanwhile, has kept his attention in the direction the boat is moving, navigating towards the boat housing warehouse. The boat slid inside silently with no knowing. Cassidy jumped off from the boat from the wheel, rope in hand as he tied the boat to another boat. There wasn't an empty space for their boat, and the group had no intention of returning or even using the boat they stole again, so it didn't matter to them. Kiriko hummed and stood up, ruffling Izuku's hair, causing the stiff boy to tense even more as she floatily hopped off the boat onto the wooden dock. She grabbed some items from her pocket as soon as she landed on her foot. She pulled out a piece of gum from a packet and chucked it in her mouth. She then flicked the packet to her other hand to put it back in her pocket while her first hand held a phone. Hanzo made sure his quiver was secure before leaping off onto the wooden platform. Ash checked over her jacket with a huff, definitely not happy with being cooped up with two more strangers now. She jumped off the boat, landing on the platform. Izuku moved over and looked towards the platform. The jump didn't seem so easy, especially with his small size and relatively poor athletic ability. Yeah, he was a good runner, but other that went in hand with his overall endurance. Izuku actually became a bit queasy. His stomach was still doing loops in his body. Suddenly, he felt himself rising, as if he was being picked up. He curled his body close and looked behind him, seeing Bob lifting him up and out of the boat. "Here, Midoriya, I got you," Ash said, extending her arms to pull Izuku in. Izuku let out a breath, relaxing himself, and let Bob and Ash help him get his feet on the deck. "Thank you," Izuku responded shyly, slightly embarrassed at being helped like this. After Bob placed Izuku down, he turned and grabbed the large brown bag filled with the scraps of material Ash and Izuku nicked and tossed it on the large wooden docks. The bag flew over Ash and Izuku before crashing on the ground, announcing a clattering sound of metal. Almost everyone's necks craned to look at the bag after it smashed onto the docks. Ash's neck snapped back around, and she harshly glared at Bob. "Careful, you tin can. Don't track us any attention," Ash spat aggressively. Bob lowered his head and slowly nodded, seemingly trying to apologize. Izuku wondered why Bob didn't talk. Perhaps he didn't have a voice box, but he thought those omnics still had the ability to make sounds like beeping. Bob then jumped onto the platform next to Izuku and Ash, the boat rocking violently after the force of the giant omnic's jump. The warehouse was quiet, although Izuku believed it would be momentarily. He looked over to see Kiriko bouncing towards Hanzo, looking down at her phone from time to time, and Cassidy waiting further at the entrance where Hanzo was walking towards, seemingly trying to block him off. Ash, Bob, and Izuku trailed after them, Ash staunchly taking the lead over the other two. Hanzo stops and gazes at Cassidy with a stoic expression. Cassidy smiles lazily, pushing himself off of the wall he was leaning against, and slowly trots closer to Hanzo. Kiriko makes her way over to Hanzo and rests her elbow on his shoulder, her arm reaching her head from the height difference of the two. "So, you got an idea of what you're doing, Bowman?" Cassidy questioned, placing his arms on his hips. Hanzo breathes in, raises his chin up higher to stand against Cassidy. "I'm leaving to finish the job," Hanzo responds. And then, Kiriko piped up, cheekily drawling out her words in attempt to rattle the grouchy archer. Hanzo side-eyes the girl who looked up at him expectantly, although he could tell she was holding back a smug grin. The other three walk up behind them, Hanzo looking back before turning back and scrunching his face, closing his eyes. "I'll go where the wind takes me," Hanzo answers, opening his eyes to stare at Cassidy. Cassidy looked back at Hanzo, his eyes scanning his before the cowboy groans, rolling his neck and trying to crack it. "You're as stubborn as a donkey. You know that, Hanzo," Cassidy sighs, relenting on trying to sway Hanzo. He clearly understood that he would not budge. Kiriko huffed as well, shaking her head but bouncing right back up with a smile. "Enough about what he's going to do. What about us? At least half of Japan is on our butt, and apparently he's wanted?" Ash exclaimed, moving closer to the center of the group and pointing a finger back towards Izuku. "Yeah, your face is all around the news. Izuku Yagi kidnapped by weapon smugglers, then ex-Overwatch criminal Jesse McCree and notorious American gangster Calamity Ash. What's that about? And I thought your name was Midoriya." Kiriko spoke out loud, seemingly unfazed by the severity of what she was saying. Izuku flinched when Kiriko looked towards him after questioning his name, and he suddenly became nervous. Izuku started rubbing his fingers together nervously behind his back. Izuku felt Bob's metallic hand touch his shoulder, and the green-haired spun around to stare up at the metal giant. Bob tilted his head as he looked down at the nervous teen, and Izuku gulped. He turned his head again as he heard someone approach him, and saw Cassidy come next to him and crouch. "You don't have to be worried, Midoriya. You don't have to say anything if you don't want to," Cassidy informed Izuku gently, giving the teen a caring look. Izuku nodded his head rapidly. No, No. I'm already in too deep to really care now. Well, other than being rescued by Cassidy and getting into a fuss with Ash at a service station, I haven't done anything. My, father is all might and no, he is not worried. I'm quirkless and he and the rest of my family haven't been treating me well, which has led me to accidentally run away. Izuku finished nervously. Accidentally? Hanzo inquired. Don't worry about it, Cassidy stated quickly, protecting Izuku from any potential further questions. Really, I presumed he lived in some luxurious bunker because of how identifiable and powerful he is, Kiriko added, putting a finger to her chin. Izuku chuckled nervously, rubbing the back of his neck. Well, he looks quite different when not on duty. He's usually freakishly skinny. Kiriko's eyebrow shot one eyebrow up in confusion, but withheld any more questions. Silence covers the group for a few moments. Cassidy grunts as he raises himself to his feet and looks up into the air with a long breath. God, these past 72 hours have been like a rodeo. I came to Japan to find Hanzo, ran into a stray kid in need of some help, reunited with the past, and now have found Jinji's brother and niece. Cassidy laughed, his usual charismatic facade breaking slightly as the weight of the bombshells are starting to take a toll. Izuku looks at Cassidy with a worried expression, but the man seemingly shook off whatever feeling he was experiencing. Izuku knew the man was a veteran when it came to pressure. In fact, he seems to revel in it. But Izuku couldn't help but be concerned. Oh, is this Genji here? Kiriko said enthusiastically, quickly hopping towards Cassidy, Izuku and Bob. Ash and Hanzo were off guard by the sudden brightness of Kiriko, but followed. Kiriko stood next to Bob, the Omnic bending down to look at the phone Kiriko had in her hands as she held it out for others to see. Hanzo and Ash leaned their heads in and squinted their eyes to see the tiny screen. With the exception of Kiriko, the group was surprised what was on screen. It was a video of large Omnics seemingly fueled by purple energy. It was terrorizing a city with people crying out. Izuku believed it sounded French, but he wasn't nearly versed enough to confirm so. Izuku watched in fearful anticipation as he waited for someone to come and save the day. Izuku is used to watching videos like this. Many times he has used these videos to fanboy over Overwatch agents or analyze heroes. However, he hasn't done that in a while, and he has no idea what kind of content is in the video. However, his eyes widen in excitement as he catches a large dark blue gorilla wearing white armor. Izuku watched the ape smash a large white object onto an Onmic, smashing it to pieces. Vibrant blue electricity spark out from it. Winston, Izuku whispered unknowingly out loud. The video is jittery, clearly depicting the recorder's panic. Izuku saw some Omnics trapped in ice, which he found a little strange, but presumed it was just a French hero helping out. Although he hasn't actually seen a hero yet, concerning him slightly. His worries were then magnified upon seeing a Goliath Omnic appear. It towered over skyscrapers, and one of its arms looked to be a cannon. The Omnic seemingly looked down at the street, its own body too wide to fit the large road that had 8 lanes of cars. It raised its cannon arm slightly, and a laser of purple energy rushed out, slicing into the ground, causing an explosion of rubble and debris as it seemed to eat up the ground. The Omnic's arm started to rise, reeling the giant laser further up the road, jam-packed with abandoned vehicles. The laser ripped through the ground, and the cameraman watched the laser approach them at a rapid pace. The cameraman tripped, the person falling over, and Izuku winced hearing them scream along with 2 other people, one of them being a child. As the death laser was close enough, almost the entire screen was vibrant mass of purple. A large blue pillar of ice shot in front of the camera. A powerful force struck the ice. It immediately cracked, but it seemed to withstand the brief encounter with the ice wall as it skimmed past a mere moment later, traveling onto the road behind the camera, as shown when the camera pans behind to see the barreling laser. Not much was shown after, as the cameraman retreated with a woman and child with him, scrambling to get behind a building, so they didn't see much after what comes next. Kiriko speeds up the video by a couple of minutes, and the next thing the group get to see about the situation is the massive robot top half encased in ice with other parts of them destroyed as it laid motionless on the floor. Panning over, the camera shows a group varying people. A great blue ape that Izuku had already recognized as Winston. Not only that, he recognized a woman with long blonde hair, tied in a ponytail holding a staff, and donning an angel costume. That was Mercy, a combat medic for Overwatch who did not stop her efforts at healing those in need, as shown by the several articles of her in Egypt, caring for those injured despite the sour stigma about her. There was also a large man in a suit of armor with gray hair and a beard. He held a hammer that was as tall as he was, and he had lions' heads on parts of his suit of armor. It wasn't an exact replica of the man Izuku first saw as an introduction to Overwatch, but there was no doubt in his mind that he was Reinhardt. The last person Izuku recognized was a thin woman wearing tight orange and white clothing with what seemed to be a metal vest over their chest with a glowing blue orb in the center. She has short brown hair, tinted goggles, and cool white guns that share the same glowing blue energy orb on her chest. This is Tracer, a pilot that is able to blink herself forward in time. The rest were new to Izuku. There was a person in a gray hoodie that seemed connected to their clothes. They had a mask on with a glowing green visor, and Izuku could spot other green attributes on their body, including a sword that was sheathed in their back. On closer inspection, their hand also entirely seemed mechanical. There was a tall girl with reddish hair, standing next to Reinhardt. She also wore armor and was definitely similar to the German Crusader design he has known Reinhardt to have. She held a small metal club in her hand, but has also seemed to have a chain connecting to her armor from the weapon. In addition, there was a CRB plate on her left hand, similar to Reinhardt, indicating Izuku she had a shield like him. The final person was a girl with glasses and had brown hair strung into a ponytail like Mercy, but was wearing a large, blue, fluffy winter coat with a metal pack strapped to her back. In her hand was a strange gun. The barrel was far too big to properly fire a bullet, and judging by the icy capsule on the side of the gun, Izuku guessed it was either an icicle or snowball. She may have been responsible for the ice wall that saved the cameraman before. The ninja with a sword is Jinji, Hanzo stated, and Izuku heard Cassidy hum in confirmation. Wait, is that recent? Ash asked, perplexed at what she saw, not convinced it was real. Yeah, Paris was attacked by the Omnic terrorist group Null Sector. Overwatch swooped in and saved the day, Kiriko answered, bringing her phone away and to her chest. She then turned and stepped away from the others and turned around. The group dispersed, giving each other personal space as they looked around at each other. Didn't know that. Although I've had other things to worry about. I think I need to make a call to them before they get busy with something else, Cassidy mused, pulling out his own phone that looked very old. Izuku didn't exactly know what a burner phone was, but if he had to guess, that was it. You make that call. I'll be on my way, Hanzo informed the group, turning around and walking towards the exit of the warehouse. Cassidy paused and rolled his eyes at the stoic man and called after him. Where are you going? We'll help, Cassidy said. This surprised Hanzo, and he turned around with a raised eyebrow. We will. Ash piped, confusion etched into her tone. With her arms crossed, she glanced over to Izuku, who matched her confused expression and raised his arms to prove that he had no idea what was happening either. But they both mentally linked with each other that they believed this to be a bad idea. However, they were in too deep to really back out, and they had enough trust in Cassidy to believe he knew what he was doing. He did know more about whatever situation was going on compared to them. You don't know what you're getting into, Hanzo responds, his tone cold as his eyes narrowed at the audacious cowboy. Cassidy smirks with pride, taking a step closer to Hanzo. Again, the two adult males challenge each other with their piercing stares. I don't have to get involved, but if you need a good distraction and an emergency getaway, we're your people, Cassidy stated proudly. Hanzo frown deepened as he continued to stare at the Western man. You are still really trying to get me to go with you, Hanzo sighed. You haven't given me a good reason not to, Cassidy replied, challenging Hanzo again. Hanzo pursed his lips, his eyes staining Cassidy at this point for how hard he had been locked on him. Eventually the man gives up and turns around, but does speak. I'm heading to Onami Avenue to intercept a trade, then going to hit Shigaro. If you hit Shigaro 25, that'll make things easier. Hanzo spoke solemnly before walking away. Cassidy smiled triumphantly, looking over to Izuku, Ash and Bob. He winks at them and gives them a thumbs up. Izuku and Ash just gave a face, a mixture of confusion, fear and disgust, while Bob's eyes shutters closed, and he raised his hand up to return Cassidy's gesture with a thumbs up. I'll go with him. Meet you guys there. Oh, and can I come with you guys? Kiriko asked, looking back as she scampered closer to the door, her hand on her fox mask as she looked back at the group. Cassidy shrugged and nodded his head. If you want to get involved in this mess, sure. Since you are Ginji's niece, he'll probably endorse you, Cassidy answered. Kiriko nodded with a smile before sliding her mask over her face. As she left through the door, she whispered to herself that only she could hear. I hope so. Kiriko dashed away, leaving the four in silence. Ash was the first to make noise, groaning and turning her head, her arms still holding her chest. She spits onto the water before rolling her jaw and looking over to Cassidy, who was looking over at her. Didn't like her, or him for a matter of fact, Ash stated plainly, her face scrunched in appall. You don't like anyone, Ash, Cassidy responded, without missing a beat. Izuku looks worriedly up at Cassidy, fidgeting with his fingers from nerves. So, are we going to follow? I'm not clear on what's going on, Izuku asked. He had been thrown for a loop this entire conversation. He was still giddy and reeling from the feeling of watching Overwatch agents in action again. It had been so long since they had been abandoned. The best he has done is watched reruns of what he has seen. But those had been sparse as Japan essentially scrubbed all positive Overwatch-related content from social media. It was only criminal, criminal, criminal. But now he was being thrown with Cassidy and Ash to buy a distraction for Hanzo, someone who didn't seem to be so keen to be around them. Safe to say, Izuku wasn't very confident about whatever plan Cassidy had cooking in his brain, but he was too scared to say it out loud in fear of being mocked or told to listen to people who were clearly smarter. He had hitched a joy ride with Cassidy and was relying on the man to protect him, something he knows Cassidy will do. He was just worried about something going wrong and everything going up in smoke. He didn't want to see Cassidy be captured, nor did he want to be confronted by his all might, the rest of his family, or anyone else in his dealings about Overwatch. Hell, he didn't want to see Ash arrested either. Maybe it was the connection he had with a fellow quirkless person, but she has been one of the few people to be nice to him, treat him as something above useless trash. She may be a criminal, but Izuku is seen to idolize a major criminal organization. With how he knows quirkless people like himself are treated, he doesn't blame Ash for going down the path that she has. Hell, he is proud of her abilities as a quirkless person, giving the whole of America and the rest of the world a middle finger. Come on, we need to head after them. They'll definitely get there faster, so let's not waste time, Cassidy recommended. He walked towards the door, and strangely Ash and Izuku were being shoved forward by Bob. Hey, we can walk on our own, Ash growled, banging her elbow back at Bob. The Omnic stopped when he was jabbed, but made no motion of being hurt. Ash turned and looked straight up at Bob, who only blankly stared back. She huffed in frustration and hurriedly staunched forward after Cassidy. Izuku began jogging to keep up. How are we going to get there? Do we know where we are? Can we avoid being seen, especially with Bob? Izuku spoke up about his concerns, looking behind him to see the robot butler comically jogging behind him. He heard Cassidy laugh in a way that did not instill confidence into Izuku. No thing way, Ash swore as Bob moved the manhole cover Cassidy had asked him to move. The three humans stared down the hole, and combined with the darkness of night, they couldn't see the bottom. Well, unless you have a better idea, we better get moving, Cassidy barked with a wide grin before jumping down the hole. Izuku and Ash's eyes shot wide as she watched her fellow Western disappear into the darkness. Come on, Cassidy called. Ash grumbled in annoyance, her eyes traveling towards Izuku to see him with a fearful expression. Her harsh expression softens, and she tried to calm herself down. Cautiously, she reached a hand towards Izuku, making the teen look towards the white-haired woman. Ash gave an awkward out-of-character smile, trying to soothe his worries. Izuku gave her a sweet, innocent smile back and took her hand. Ash's heart went into overdrive upon seeing Izuku's innocent expression. The weird trust she received from Izuku was foreign to her. The last person she had received the same sort of care and any kind of trust with was Cassidy. Ash had to stop herself from her thoughts from wondering so she didn't freak Izuku out. She then initiated the jump down into the sewer, Izuku following behind her. Izuku and Ash both gasped in surprise when they hit the concrete floor, and they both stumbled with Izuku falling into Ash. Sorry, Izuku muttered out, but Ash assured him that he was fine. The cowgirl brushed the teen off and pulled him towards Cassidy. Then all three jumped from the tremor shockwave Bob emitted when he crashed into the ground. Ash regained her composure first and swiftly made another comment. "This place bloody reeks," Ash growled out in utter revulsion. "We'll get used to it. It'll be sunlight by the time we reach our destination," Cassidy commented, only making Ash groan louder. Izuku was worried she'd break her voice by how loud her unearthly groan of frustration was. "Fing hell, Bob," Ash spat, her tone defeated, lacking her usual bite. She clicked her fingers, and Bob held up his left hand. A finger cap on his pointer finger popped off, and a bright light illuminated from it. "Let's just get moving," Ash complained, holding her nose. Hanzo, wait up," Kiriko called after her uncle, scaling the building with nothing but her bare hands just to keep up. Hanzo never slowed down, seemingly leaping on thin air to further the gap between the two. Kiriko huffed and glared at Hanzo's retreating figure. She swung herself onto the roof of the building. Misty aqua energy flew out from her hands before exploding when she put her hands together. In a puff of the same aqua mist, she disappeared. The same mist flew out right in front of Hanzo, making the man stop as Kiriko appeared right in front of him. Hanzo's eyes widened as Kiriko swung her leg at him, causing Hanzo to duck. He reached up and grabbed her leg and tried to throw her away, but Kiriko jabbed her other leg into his shoulder blade. She aimed her elbow to hit the side of his neck, but unexpectedly Hanzo managed to shift his shoulder to make her foot on his shoulder blade slide and used that hand to catch her elbow. With her other leg already caught, Kiriko followed the momentum when Hanzo threw her to the floor, the fox girl gracefully catching herself and rolling back up into a standing position. Hanzo glared at the girl while Kiriko moved her mask back on top of her head to reveal her set-off expression. "Stop running from me. It has been 15 years since I've seen you. My mother misses you, and I've just found out that Genji is alive. I want answers. I also want to talk to you." Kiriko blurted out angrily, the frustration of her uncle refusing to give her the time of day. Kiriko's age is weird compared to Hanzo and Genji, so I will have Kiriko look really young but be 25 if it ever matters. Hanzo is 40 and Genji 37. I have nothing to say. I already have disgraced my honor. There is nothing else to go into, Hanzo gritted out, his hands clutched tightly on the fabric of his briefs. Memories of his past washed back into him, and he quickly diluted them into the back of his mind. But Kiriko hasn't backed down. "No, my mother always says how regretful she feels for leaving you alone with those greedy elders of your clan. She always told of how strict your father was with you, but how much he cared. With him gone, all the pressure on you heightened to tenfold and causing you to do something horrible," Kiriko rambled, trying to get through to Hanzo. Hanzo lowered his head, but he was too stubborn to back down from mere words. "I thank Sensei Yamagami for her kind words, but I was the one who ultimately chose my path," Hanzo told Kiriko solemnly. The girl frowned sadly, looking towards the man she respected as an uncle when she was a child. A lot of mixed emotions embellished her when her mother gave her the rundown on why she couldn't see Genji again or even visit the Shimada residence. At the time, she was so angry, confused and upset at what had happened. She was angry at Hanzo, but also felt sorrow for him. Her mother described how the elders pushed their ideals and worries about Genji to Hanzo no matter how much. She tried to interfere. Eventually Hanzo was pushed too far, and he made a terrible decision he immediately regretted and destroyed the own empire he helped his father maintain for many years. She knew he had done something horrible, but she didn't believe him to be irredeemable. She still believed that the Hanzo she knew back in that time still in there, just hidden from all the pain he burdened himself to carry alone. "Have you seen Genji again?" Kiriko asked slowly. Hanzo didn't move, a sign that could mean anything, but with what Kiriko knew of her uncle from memories, she knew she was right, and now he was contemplating. Likely lost in the past. 2 years ago, Hanzo breathed out quietly, Kiriko barely able to hear it. "We had a duel. He had disarmed and defeated me. However, he spared me and asked me to pick a side, and I still don't know what he meant by that," Hanzo answered, his eyes not reaching Kiriko. Kiriko nodded, her eyes sadly looking at the man. "Well," Kiriko started, slowly walking towards Hanzo. "It sounds like he's forgiven you, and to me, he wants you to not stand aside," Kiriko says, stopping in front of Hanzo. "There is so much going on in the world. In these recent years, I've seen it get so much worse firsthand. Hell, it made me take up the mantle of a vigilante. Right now, Hanzo, I think what Jinji was trying to tell you was that the time of waiting is over. Something needs to be done. Just which side of the battle will you choose to be on? Kiriko said with compassion but power to Hanzo, placing a hand on the man's shoulder. At last, Hanzo looked up to Kiriko, and the girl smiled at him. I think it's time for you to stop being sorry for yourself. Let me help you, Hanzo. Please, Kiriko said. Hanzo sighed and stood up straight, now being above Kiriko. He looked down at the girl. A brief flash in his mind replaced Kiriko's face with a much younger version of what he remembered of over 15 years ago. You have grown a lot, Hanzo stated before ever so slightly cracking a smile. Do you still like Poke? We have time to grab some. Kiriko beamed brightly. Hell yeah, but you still owe me a lot of catching up to do. Kiriko laughed in triumph.